When a person faces the untimely death of their spouse, a fundamental question arises: what should be done first? For most, the answer remains unclear, and in the moment of irreplaceable loss, they are engulfed by deep grief, overwhelming confusion, and the necessity of making decisions they never anticipated handling alone. The truth is, regardless of the strength of the marital bond or the length of time spent together, the passing of a spouse irrevocably changes everything familiar. This event literally pulls the rug out from under one's feet, leaving behind a piercing emptiness and handing the grieving individual a list of urgent tasks at a time when they can barely get out of bed. This isn't about legal formalities or funeral etiquette. It's about the first steps one needs to take for themselves, both emotionally and practically, to navigate the initial, most powerful waves of grief. We will delve into 6 key stages designed to help a person maintain inner stability during one of the hardest periods of their existence. These are not dry instructions or detached recommendations. They are based on real experience, deep compassion, and the understanding that grief does not come with a user manual. Each of these 6 points is what ordinary people, finding themselves in similar situations, have recognized as vital for their healing journey. While none of them can completely eliminate the pain of loss, they can provide a sense of support and stability when everything around feels shaky and uncertain. If a spouse passes away sooner, and one hopes that day is still very, very far off, a person needs to know how to act not only to sustain life but ultimately, to regain the ability to live fully again. Step 1. Allow yourself to feel before trying to fix anything. When a spouse passes, the world doesn't just quiet down, it seems to plunge into a stupor. Familiar rituals, conversations one always counted on, even the subtle sound of footsteps in the next room, all of it suddenly vanishes. And the ensuing silence is not just external. It settles deep in the chest, becoming heavy and devastating. In the first few days, there's an overwhelming temptation to dive into a whirlwind of tasks, dealing with documents, making calls, organizing arrangements, handling logistics, anything to stay busy enough to avoid feeling the crushing weight of the loss. However, the truth is, before taking any action, a person needs to allow themselves to feel. This doesn't mean falling completely apart. It means giving yourself permission to grieve without guilt, without rigid timelines, and without judgment. There is no single right way to mourn. There's no set schedule for when tears will stop or when the marital bed will cease to feel so unbearably empty. The most important thing in these early days is not to suppress your feelings so strongly that they harden and turn to stone. For grief that you try to run from doesn't disappear, it merely waits for its moment. And when it returns later, it does so with far greater confusion and intensified pain. Some people mistakenly perceive showing emotion as weakness, especially after a profound loss. They might tell themselves, "I must be strong for the children," or "he wouldn't want me to cry." But true strength isn't found in silence. It doesn't mean swallowing your sorrow so that others don't feel uncomfortable. Strength is the ability to allow yourself to acknowledge the full depth of your love and the gaping void left by the departure of a loved one. Consider the story of Evelyn, an 81-year-old woman who lost her husband after 52 years of marriage. In the first week, she busied herself with tasks and tidied closets, assuring everyone that she was perfectly fine. But late at night, she often found herself staring intently at his favorite armchair. Not because she missed their conversations, but because she was pretending not to miss them. When she finally allowed herself to cry, truly, uncontrollably cry, something inside her shifted. Not because the pain instantly vanished, but because she could finally breathe easier. You are not broken because you are devastated. You are not weak because you cannot get through a day without succumbing to emotion. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is a burden that must be carried. And if you don't give yourself enough space to fully acknowledge this burden, you'll eventually carry it in unhealthy ways, through anger, emotional numbness, or even physical ailments. So the first thing to do if your spouse passes away sooner is to stop. Be with that loss, even if it's unbearably painful. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to talk about them. Allow yourself to acknowledge that nothing makes logical sense right now. You don't need a clear plan of action. You don't need to demonstrate bravery or stoicism. You simply need to give your feelings free rein. For it is through this acknowledgement that the healing process begins. And healing, as we know, always starts with sincerity. Step 2. The urgency of reaching out for help. In the first hours and days after a spouse's passing, a sense of isolation can creep in unnoticed and envelop a person faster than they expect. One moment, the house is filled with calls, food is brought, flowers are sent, and then suddenly, silence descends. The door stops knocking. The phone rings less frequently. And if you're not vigilant, this silence can escalate into deep alienation. This is why one of the most important actions you can take early on is to reach out for help before loneliness settles too deeply in your soul. You don't have to say anything profound. You don't need to explain your feelings in detail, but it is crucial to let people know that you are here and that you need their support. This doesn't mean pouring your heart out to everyone you meet or trying to entertain guests when you can barely function. It simply means not waiting for others to make the first move. Because the truth is, even the people who love you most may not know what to say or how to help. They might hesitate not because they don't care, but because they are afraid of intruding on your personal space. By taking this small step, sending a message, picking up the phone, or simply responding when someone checks on you, you create a kind of protective barrier against the type of loneliness that is not just unpleasant but begins to negatively impact your mind and body. Social isolation is one of the most detrimental phenomena that can happen to a person after loss. It negatively affects sleep quality, blood pressure, immune function, and even memory. And it does so subtly, insidiously. Recall the story of Jim, a 77-year-old man whose wife died after a long illness. At first, friends called him every day, but he often let calls go to voicemail. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to repeat the story of his loss or pretend everything was fine. And gradually, the calls stopped. It wasn't until a neighbor knocked on his door several weeks later that Jim realized he had been subtly slipping into depression. After that, he made a small promise to himself: just one call a day.
One real conversation.
This tiny act grew into something more. It became his lifeline. Grief tries to convince you that you are alone. But connecting with others reminds you that this is not true. You don't have to talk about the loss if you're not ready. You can talk about memories, the weather, a funny story from years ago. The presence itself is what matters, the knowledge that someone is on the other end of the line or across the table. And if you don't have close relatives or worry about being a burden, remember this: many communities have bereavement support groups, senior centers, or local volunteers who are willing to sit with you, talk, or simply offer quiet company. Reaching out for help doesn't mean admitting defeat. It means choosing not to carry your pain alone. The early days after a loss are dangerous not only emotionally but also physically. Your body is under stress. Your mind is clouded, and your heart is vulnerable. Surrounding yourself with people, even in the smallest ways, acts as a kind of emotional framework, supporting you until you find your balance again. Step 3. The urgency of organizing important documents. When someone passes away, especially a spouse, it feels like the world should stop. But the truth is, the world keeps moving. Bills arrive, notifications are sent, bank accounts may be frozen. And in the midst of your grief, you are suddenly confronted with questions you may not be prepared to answer. This is why one of the most important things you must do, as delicately and clearly as possible, is to locate and review all important documents related to your spouse's life. This is not a sign of coldness or heartlessness. It is an absolute necessity. You will need to find the will, insurance policies, bank account information, marriage certificate, death certificate, and any documents concerning property, pensions, or military service. And you will have to do this while your mind is weary and your heart is wounded. It is at this stage that many people either postpone these matters due to overwhelm or rush through them without proper clarity. Both can lead to mistakes that will make the coming weeks even more painful than they need to be. Some people believe they will get to it when they are ready. But, unfortunately, time is not always under your control. There are legal and financial steps that often have strict deadlines. You may need to file a life insurance claim. You may need to contact Social Security. You may need to transfer utility accounts. If you wait too long or miss something important, it can negatively impact your financial situation in ways that are difficult to rectify. Recall the story of Harold, a 79-year-old man who unexpectedly lost his wife. For years, she had handled most of their paperwork. So when she passed away, Harold was at a loss, not knowing where the insurance policy was. Weeks passed before he finally discovered it, tucked away in a drawer in her sewing room. By then, he had already covered several unforeseen expenses from his own savings. Knowing the policy's location would certainly have helped him during that period. It wasn't a matter of neglect. It was simply a matter of timing and circumstances. And when a person is grieving, achieving clarity of thought is extremely difficult. If you feel too overwhelmed to tackle these documents alone, ask someone you completely trust to sit with you while you do it. This could be a family member, a close friend, or even a professional advisor. Someone who can slowly and methodically go through all the papers and help track what has been found and what still needs attention. Even simply creating a checklist can help dispel the fog of confusion. Keep all important documents in one place. Get a dedicated folder or box. Make copies of the most crucial papers. Write down account numbers, passwords, contact names, everything someone else would need if they had to take over your responsibilities. Because grief is not only a deep emotional state. It also carries a significant administrative burden. And this part often catches many by surprise. This step may seem purely businesslike, but in reality, it is part of honoring your spouse's life. It is a guarantee that nothing will be lost, overlooked, or left in chaos. It is a protection of the legacy they worked so hard to build and an assurance that you do not bear this burden alone. You don't need to complete everything in one day, but you absolutely must start. And once you begin, you will often find that the very act of organizing, even in a state of profound sadness, can bring a small sense of order back to a world that suddenly feels unrecognizable. Step 4. The discipline of protecting your health. Grief doesn't just affect your heart, it impacts your entire body. And in the days and weeks following a spouse's death, it may be harder than ever to take care of yourself. Meals are skipped. Sleep becomes fragmented and restless.
All motivation disappear.
Even simple things like brushing your teeth or going outside can seem meaningless. But it is now that caring for your health matters most. Because the loss of a spouse doesn't just disrupt the familiar rhythm of life. It jeopardizes your physical well-being in ways you might not expect. Many widowed older adults experience sudden weight loss, chronic fatigue, digestive problems, chest tightness, and forgetfulness. Not because they are ill, but because their bodies are reacting to profound emotional stress. This state of stress, if prolonged, can weaken the immune system, raise blood pressure, disrupt hormone levels, and exacerbate existing conditions. Grief is a reality, and the toll it takes on your body is real. You don't need a perfect routine. You don't need to train for a marathon or completely change your diet, but you do need to provide your body with basic care, even if it feels pointless at first. This means regularly eating nutritious food, even if the portions are small. It means moving your body, just a slow walk around the block or gentle stretching in the living room. It means going to bed at a reasonable time, even if you don't fall asleep immediately. These are not just health tips, they are acts of survival. Recall Margaret, 84, who lost her husband of 60 years. In those first weeks, she was so overwhelmed that she forgot to take her blood pressure medication and skipped several meals in a row. It wasn't until she collapsed in the grocery store that her daughter realized what was happening. This wasn't a medical emergency in the usual sense. It was grief, untreated and unchecked, seeping into her physical system. Once Margaret started keeping a written daily routine, meals, water, pills, daily check-ins, her strength slowly returned, as did her clarity of mind. In grief counseling, there's a saying that applies here: when you don't know what to do, take care of the animal inside you. Feed it. Water it.
Let it rest. Let it move.
Because at the most basic level, your body is trying to find its equilibrium again. And it needs your help to achieve that. You may not feel hungry. Eat anyway. You may not feel tired. Go to bed anyway. You may not want to get dressed. Do it anyway. Not because you're pretending to be strong, but because you are rebuilding that strength, one quiet decision at a time. And do not hesitate to see a doctor during this time. Even if you think it's just stress, sometimes even just talking to a professional and having your vitals checked can help you find your footing. It reminds you that you are still here, still in need of care. Caring for yourself doesn't mean moving on. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the person you lost without losing yourself in the process. Step 5. The danger of hasty decisions. After a loss, there often arises a sudden, almost instinctive desire to make drastic changes in one's life. A person might feel a strong temptation to sell the house, move closer to their children, get rid of the deceased spouse's belongings, or make major financial transactions, just to avoid painful reminders. This is perfectly understandable. When the familiar world is turned upside down, changing one's surroundings can seem like the only way to regain some sense of control. However, the truth is that most major decisions made in the early stages of grief are decisions that people later regret. This doesn't mean you won't eventually need to make changes. Perhaps you will. But right now, your mind is clouded by sorrow, exhaustion, and a desperate craving for stability that cannot be satisfied by external actions. What seems like a solution today might become a source of deep regret a few months down the line. And when your spouse passes away, the last thing you need is additional layers of loss. Consider the example of George, 76, who suddenly lost his wife after a stroke. Within 2 weeks, he sold their shared home and moved into a small apartment near his son, believing it would help him feel less lonely. But once the dust settled, George found himself overwhelmed with regret. He missed his neighbors, his garden, and the kitchen they had remodeled together. The apartment, though practical, felt alien and lifeless to him. And now he had to grieve both the loss of his wife and the comfort and familiarity of the life they had built together for so long. Grief needs space. And part of that space involves waiting before you make permanent changes. You don't have to leave photographs where they are forever, but you also don't have to take them down tomorrow. You don't need to immediately decide whether to keep the house, close an account, cancel a membership, or redistribute belongings. Give yourself permission to pause. And if others pressure you to move forward or clear things out, gently but firmly explain that you need time. This isn't about clinging to the past. It's about allowing your emotions to catch up with reality. Acting too quickly might temporarily ease discomfort, but it often leaves deep emotional scars that take years to process. This is especially true for financial decisions. Signing documents, selling assets, or changing investments should be done with the utmost caution and, ideally, with the help of someone you trust who is not emotionally involved in the situation. Whether it's a family member, a financial advisor, or even an experienced friend, having another pair of eyes when making these decisions can protect you from actions driven by desperation or confusion. What you are facing is extremely difficult, and there is no shame in taking your time. In fact, it is a sign of wisdom. The goal is not to avoid action forever. The goal is to act from a place of clarity, not impulsive reaction. And that clarity only comes with time, rest, and support. You have already experienced one major change. Do not multiply the pain by rushing into others. Allow yourself to adjust. Let the fog clear. And when the right moment comes, you will know. You will feel more stable, more confident, more capable of looking forward without losing what is important from the past. Step 6. The quiet work of rebuilding your identity. When your spouse dies, you are not just grieving their physical absence. You are grieving the version of yourself that existed alongside them. You were part of a team, a shared rhythm, a partnership with its own unique language. Perhaps you were known as John and Mary, or you said we, or simply us. But now there is no us. And this change is far deeper than just a shift in nomenclature. It shifts the very foundation of who you perceive yourself to be. At first, this may not be obvious. You might be focused on arrangements, documents, visitors, and daily survival. But eventually, in the quiet, a question begins to echo: who am I now? And the truth is, most people are not ready to answer it. For decades, your life may have revolved around shared routines, meals, decisions, goals, even jokes that only the two of you understood. Without that shared presence, your role changes. You are no longer the caregiver, the partner, the spouse in the way you were. And it's not that your love disappears. It never does. But the structure in which it lived has changed forever. This stage of grief is not often discussed, but it is one of the most crucial. It is the slow, quiet work of rebuilding your sense of self, not as a replacement, but as an evolution. It is allowing yourself to ask, what do I like now? What does peace mean to me? What do I want to dedicate these next years to, even if they are different from what I envisioned? Take Irene, 82, who lost her husband after 55 years of marriage. Initially, she left everything as it was. His slippers by the door, his coffee mug on the countertop. She couldn't imagine life without us. But months later, she started painting again, something she hadn't done since she was 20. Her return to the brush was not an attempt to distract herself from the pain, but a deep yearning to reconnect with a part of herself she seemed to have long forgotten. This in no way diminished her love for her late husband. On the contrary, it was a realization that she was still alive and, despite the loss, had to continue her life's journey. A person is allowed to change, to grow, to become a new individual, while carefully preserving the memory of who they were in their shared life. Rebuilding your own identity is not a betrayal of the past. On the contrary, it honors it by allowing you to move forward with a new, meaningful intention. This might manifest as joining new communities, pursuing long-held travel dreams, reading previously unexplored genres of literature, forming new friendships, or simply finding comfort in your own company. It is not an attempt to replace lost love. It is rather a search for answers to the challenges that life presents. You don't need to figure everything out at once. In fact, it's impossible. The identity that forms after loss unfolds gradually, step by step, day by day. But every small step, every new habit, every tiny spark of curiosity, these are all part of reclaiming your own story. You are not just the version of yourself that existed alongside your spouse. You are also who you become without them. And this new version of yourself deserves no less care, attention, and love than the previous one. Concluding thoughts. The loss of a spouse represents one of the deepest and most painful wounds life can inflict. It doesn't merely deprive a person of a beloved life partner. It irrevocably disrupts the familiar rhythm of days, strips the home of its accustomed sounds, and takes away the comfort of feeling seen and understood without words. Nothing can prepare one for this all-encompassing silence. And nothing can fully fill it. However, no matter how unbearable the pain, there are actions that can be taken. These are small, deeply human, compassionate steps designed to help one weather the storm of loss and slowly, cautiously, begin to rebuild life anew. These 6 steps we've discussed are not rigid rules. They are more like anchors that help a person stay grounded when grief feels too overwhelming. They include allowing yourself to feel before trying to fix anything, urgently reaching out for help, organizing important documents, protecting your health, avoiding hasty decisions, and rebuilding your identity. None of these steps are easy, but each is immensely significant. You don't need to be flawless in this process. You don't need to rush. The important thing is simply to keep moving forward. And if a person takes nothing else from this, let it be this. You are not alone in your grief. Many others have walked this path. Many are walking it right now. And each of them, like you, is learning to live with a broken heart. Grief does not signify the end of a life story. It marks the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter you didn't ask for, never wished for, but one you must still write. And in this chapter it is you, the grieving individual, who defines what healing looks like, how love will manifest, and what life can become, even after a heart has said goodbye.